You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Warwicker with Weekend, and I have two guests with me for the rest of the programme who'll offer their perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. Natasha Cole is here, writer, poet, also a professor of politics, international relations and critical interdisciplinary studies, which is not an easy thing to say at this hour in the morning. Morning, Natasha.
Or do. Thank you very much. Good morning.
And James Lynch is here, founding co-director of Fair Square, which is based in London. Fair Square investigates and challenges the causes of human rights abuses. James, welcome. Good morning.
Morning.
An introductory word to you both. Natasha, I mentioned three things. I could have added economist, I could have added artist. How do you balance all of this?
I think it's just a way of making meaning in different ways, things you want to analyze affectively or analytically. But, more specifically, I think in recent times, I have published political fiction as well, novels, including about conflict and how people's lives are affected by it. But in more recent times, the three main themes that I've focused on, one is the global rise of the right wing, which is a very urgent contemporary issue in international politics, and specifically the links between misogyny, how it's used for authoritarian erosion of democracy and used as a political strategy, and how it affects things like climate change. So that's one area. The other is a focus on small states, which I think are very underemphasized international actors, and very often they are norm entrepreneurs. They pursue innovative policies. So those sorts of things have been very much on my mind and in my work. And there's a continuing focus on gender, on the importance of women's rights, the importance of equity, challenging the way in which rights are being attacked throughout the globe.
We'll dip into at least some of those during the next couple of hours. You mentioned small states. Bhutan is one you have looked at in some detail, isn't it?
Yes, very much, for a long period of time, since 2006.
You better put it on the map for people.
Well, the conventional way in which it is defined is that it is a small country between India and China. However, nobody ever defined Switzerland quite like that. So I think that there are other ways of thinking about it. It's one of the rare carbon negative places on the planet. It's a place that had an unusual transition to democracy in 2008, that mandates constitutionally that 60% of the country remain under forest cover in perpetuity. So it has a lot of innovative policies. I was in fact there not too long ago over this winter when they had their fourth elections since the transition. And it's always a very interesting and very interesting thing, basically, to see a small state kind of come together and do things its own way.
Well, thank you for taking us there. Both James and Natasha, you both look at international relations in some detail in your work. James, how much do you relish this? Described as being unpredictable. It reneged on prior international commitments. I don't think he would argue with either of those analyses. In fact, he would probably quite like them. Upending diplomatic conventions, embracing political and economic brinkmanship with most adversaries. Natasha, how do you see it if he were to be the president again?
I think it would be catastrophic for the planet, and for various reasons. One, I think because it will enable a strengthening of various kinds of transnational repression and authoritarian right-wing, similar kinds of political projects in other countries. It would be very terrible for women's rights, because that has clearly been something that we've seen in his term be affected very directly. And it would be very bad for the environment, which is something that I think that we all, as a planet globally, need to care and worry for. So the risks cannot be underemphasized.
I saw you wince when he said drill, baby, drill.
Yes, I've recently, just in the last year, published work with a psychology colleague in which we surveyed Trump supporters, and we found empirical evidence that Trump supporters are more likely to support authoritarianism and think that climate change is not real and we shouldn't do anything about it. So this isn't just conceptual argument, it is also empirically borne out. They construct the idea of security along a very us versus them strongman kind of leader who is the only national claims a monopoly on nationalism. Everyone else is anti-national or against the country. They've brought their rhetoric is matched by the changes that they make in terms of legislation or policy, increase political othering, increase polarization, and all of this, I think it has to be seen in the context of broader than just America, in the sense that we for years not wanted to say the F word, but the kind of, the fascism word, but the kind of politics, the turn to politics that we're seeing in multiple countries is very worrying, and Trump exemplifies that. Add to which there's the idea of, if he loses, what happens, and will the institutions, procedures, and rule of law be upheld?
A brief thought on that. About Pera, on that last work of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Is that now, Natasha, on your reading list?
I think I would be very tempted. I think that it's a literature. The history of literature is full of betrayals, and we should be thankful for them. We wouldn't have probably seen Kafka had a betrayal not happened by Max Brod. As a writer myself, I ask myself the question: does it matter that you don't want something to be seen? But I think books are thoughts more than they are things, and I think it is important for readers to see the evolution of authors, and I think that we should get to see more of even the juvenilia, even of what people write in their later years once they're not around to mind. I think that it probably does literature service, and I think it's a good idea. Some of the if I think about simply the notebooks of Dag Hammarskjöld, who was a UN Secretary General, these are just sketches, ideas, things, thoughts, but it gives you an insight into a person, and I find that quite profound, actually.
You think Natasha's right, James? It's 7:06 GMT. Welcome to Weekend from the BBC World Service with me, Julia Morica. With me throughout the programme, Natasha Cole, writer, poet and Professor of Politics, International Relations and Critical Interdisciplinary Studies. Natasha, a word on India and this conflict, because Mr. Modi has quite a good relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. I think that's fair to say, isn't it? But opposition politicians have been making quite a lot of outspoken remarks about, as they see it, the plight of the Palestinians. So it's quite a complicated picture, isn't it?
It is, and I think that, just to follow on this discussion, the question really is, where are the red lines and what are the red lines? Are there any red lines? The way in which this whole thing has been proceeding, it does huge disservice to, of course, it is disastrous in an existential sense for the Palestinians, but it also does a huge disservice to those in Israel who, for a very long time, have been, speaking out against the problems of this far-right government. Now, in the context of India, there's very little incentive for the current ruling party to actually do anything different or speak up for the Palestinian cause. Having said that, the official Indian position has not changed, and they've traditionally adopted, spoken in support of Palestine. However, the de facto way in which they've been functioning is that the idea that Islamism is a problem, Muslims are a problem, terrorism is a problem. There's a kind of ethno-nationalist consensus around a state, that kind of majoritarianism, that has a lot in common. So there's no incentive for them to speak. However, the opposition politicians and people in society have, of course, spoken up about the humanitarian disaster in the region.
Let's go to you touched on issues at least allied to this one. That's a very vivid first-hand account, isn't it?
Yes, and I think that just reading about it, just getting to know the numbers doesn't give a sense of how, when these conflicts unfold, the people suffering them are not just people in the abstract sense. They are people with specific kinds of vulnerabilities, and in some cases very systematically aligned, and a cascade of them, and how it makes it so much worse. So for women and children and people with disabilities, and it is much worse. And for women, the fact that women give birth, the fact that women menstruate is not something that is secondary to the whole situation of how they're suffering. So their access to healthcare, to medical supplies, to sanitary napkins, things like that, all of that is at the core of how we think about the impact of this conflict on living human beings, and human beings who have, who this kind of punitive collective punishment, who are having to suffer this kind of punitive collective punishment, which is avoidable, and it's on top of the many other things that are happening, the insecurity for life, the lack of access to food. So it's almost impossible to imagine the scale of what the people are going through in a conflict like this.
On the wide, I wanted to get onto something with you for the next couple of minutes, which I can sum up in the headline that you wrote. I was treated like a criminal. I'm not anti-Indian. What's the story behind that?
Well, the story behind that is that I was invited to a conference on constitution and democratic values by a state government in the Congress-ruled state of Karnataka in India, in southern India. I was meant to be there for 2 days at the weekend just for the conference, arrive on Friday, leave on Monday morning. When I reached there on Friday, I had no idea that I would not be allowed entry. I would not be given any reason for not being allowed entry, except to say orders from Delhi, because immigration comes under the center.
And you travel back and forth.
And I traveled back and forth. The last time I left was at the start of February. I was given no advance information. I was kept in detention under armed guard and CCTV for 24 hours with difficult access to food and water, and then sent back, and subsequently have been subjected to the worst kind of gender trolling online, very coordinated, with death and rape threats that at one point meant that I had to take cabs everywhere, because you never know. And the only thing that I was asked at the airport, although I had the official letter and my logistics had been done by the official conference, or is whether I had been critical of the RSS leadership and RSS in India, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which calls itself a social service organization, but is a millions strong nationwide paramilitary of the right wing. That is the ideological parent of the currently ruling Bharatiya Janata Party in India.
And that's the only explanation.
That's the only thing that I have had since, before or after. And so it seems really arbitrary. And what it comes on the back of is, as we can see from Freedom House rankings, from the WeDem Index and every other report on democracy in India, is that the space for things like being able to just speak on something as acceptable as constitution, democracy and values is problematic. It's certainly terrible for academic freedom. And also it seems very arbitrary and unjust. And then to be labeled, anyone who says anything on this is called anti-national, anti-Indian, a Pakistani agent, a Western agent, a commie, a jihadi, and worse. So at one point I had to put out a tweet saying, I'm none of those things. I'm what authoritarians fear, a thinking woman. But I also feel very sorry for everyone within India currently, including, sensible thinking people who are calling this out and who are being constantly piled upon and being called anti-national too.
Well, I'm very sorry you've had to be put through all of that.
It did feel very rotten, ungenerous, and thoroughly immoral.
Have LGBTQ rights been politicised in some African countries? And what are the influence of right-wing Christian groups promoting anti-LGBTQ laws in Africa? Well, hey, Natasha.
A few points. I think firstly that there is a history of colonial codifications of laws in countries that did not do them very good and in fact were very problematic. There's also a history of problematic intervention during the 20th century in large parts of the global south. However, what is happening right now is that there is a selective weaponization of those histories in order to push back against any progressive change, both in Western and in other societies. So what's happening now is that everything's being blamed on colonialism. The impulses within a society, in this case Ghana, people who struggle for those rights, are being labeled as foreign funded, while at the same time there is a Christian right wing or other right wing sorts of groups that focus on family values, both in countries in the global north and also in other countries. So I think that this is more part of a transnational sort of ideological agenda which wants to promote a certain kind of authoritarian, non-progressive, family values type politics, whether that's Russia, whether that's, Texas, or whether that's somewhere, whether that's Ghana. And at the same time, there's this thing of different actors using, their favorite kind of historical bits to pin the blame on. But the effect of that is that the progressive impulses for changes in society that lead to greater equality for those who've been historically marginalized are being resisted.
Hayley, does that take us to the remark you made about the United Nations? Because I was interested in you referred to the United Nations and where some of this work is going on there to try and persuade people of a different point of view on this.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, Natasha, I agree with you 100%. I mean, you're totally, you're really speaking to what is happening at a transnational and global level. So, I mean, we've seen
in the next couple of days. Are the Oscars something that you two follow closely or not?
I wouldn't say much.
Yes, I don't follow it very meticulously either, but I think that I have watched quite a few of the films. I think I'd be happy if films that I quite like, Barbie, for example, once won a few awards.
It keeps missing out, doesn't it?
It did
in
last
awards at the
time,
moment.
yes.
Well, you never know. That might be its academic, who has completed a project creating a Wikipedia page for a woman in every country in the world. He's calling for more women to contribute to the world's largest encyclopedia. Them to have a chat with you. Natasha, you were the first of the two to raise interest, although I know James is too. By all means, have a chat with Lucy and sort of...
Hi, Lucy. I think the work that you're doing is so important. Virginia Woolf's statement about for most of history, Anonymous was a woman is so true because our perceptions about, we live in an era where the rule of ignorance is spreading, and public opinion is determined by what it's not fixed. It's determined by what people are able to encounter, and women's histories, women's lives, women's achievements are just not front and center in any way online. And this is so important. It's also something that I think personally is very is very kind of existentially core to me, because I have to keep calling out Wikipedia now and again because of my work on democracy and, against democratic erosion, against authoritarianism. I constantly get random edits on an entry with people saying things like, I must be married to a Pakistani man if I'm critical of the right wing in India. Or, absolute, utter, blatant lies all the time. Or that if I'm speaking about people's rights in Kashmir, it must be because I'm homophobic. Just utter nonsense. And people just put that stuff out there. And I'm actually not. I have written on AI, but I'm not technologically, I don't know how to edit those entries. And I certainly wouldn't want to edit mine. But I do think that, after decades of work that's in the public domain, much of it that could be part of an entry, a comprehensive entry that refers to my views properly. Instead of that, what I have online is just people selectively choosing bits in order to serve certain agendas. So I wish more women would do this. And, it's just great what you're doing. I can't see you. If you were able to see me, you'd see me gesticulating in enthusiasm.
She is, Lucy. Take it from me. She is beaming encouragingly. Just on that.
Thank you so much.
Just on that point about that Natasha touched upon the idea of more people doing this. That's part of what you're now saying, isn't it? You want more women to contribute to Wikipedia than do currently. Natasha, what was your take on all of that?
Well, the colonial exercise of power by democratic states in history was bad enough, but I think now in the present, by any state that is signed up to international obligations, it's terrible. And none of this, of course, condones the fact that there are extremist actors on both sides. And I, fully take on board, and I want to emphasize that point about Hamas, that there are entities here who want the conflict to entrench, continue, and who are more interested in denying the existence of the other side than in finding a solution.
And some Hamas voices have said we would do it again.
Exactly. And that is just awful. The fact that, they refuse to release the hostages is reprehensible. And the fact that Palestinians are being killed and all of this is happening is utterly atrocious. The point is that this kind of thing actually benefits certain kinds of entities, whether they are non-state actors or far-right state actors, because that is how they maintain their hold on power, by amplifying this kind of hate and the absolute epistemic violence of denying the other side's existence. And we've seen this unfold in this present situation. The thing to link back to what we were talking about earlier is that it was, as Anthony Blinken pointed out, the US Secretary of State pointed out, that the US position on settlements is illegal and is inconsistent with international law, but that in 2019, the Trump administration made these changes so that there are these links and there are ways in which we do need the two-state solution, but in order to get that, there are lots of little things that actually can be fixed by politics outside of the region as well, beyond the urging and the requesting.
Okay.
Decide first. Yeah.
Natasha, a thought or a question, whatever you wish to take it.
Well, I think gender rights, we keep seeing globally the 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This is definitely a big step forward. I think the time to wait, it would be too late if we waited when these rights were directly under threat. So this is definitely a very positive move in France. And the fact that this change was passed with a large majority, although there was some dissent, but with a large majority, is also very heartening. I think it's a laudable initiative.
James? That was BBC's Frey Lindsay reporting from Palau, which is not a place we take you to very often on this programme, but it does at least take us to the world of conservation and by connection to climate change, which I know, Natasha, is something you mentioned right at the start of the programme. It seems extraordinary that we've been on air for nearly 3 hours and haven't mentioned it. Here's our moment.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that links both to climate change and to the significance of small states in some of these ventures, because small states, microstates, especially small island developing states, have most to lose from climate change. Hence, they've often pioneered these initiatives. Now, in this case, I mean, conservation decisions are never easy. And as I was listening to that segment, I was just thinking that the trade-offs between economy and environment often do not adequately recognize the costs of what the counterfactual might be if we did not conserve. So in this sense, these moves are, I think, really important. They seem unconventional, they seem far away, but these are important initiatives that in the end actually matter for the planet as a whole.
James, you were nodding about memory at the end of the programme in a moment. Before we do that, a word about events on Narendra Modi told people in the disputed region of Kashmir that taking away its autonomous status has paved the way for economic growth. He was speaking on his first visit to the Muslim-majority territory since making that change 5 years ago. Security inevitably tight in the city of Srinagar. Thousands of extra soldiers were deployed ahead of his visit. There was drone surveillance in place, and schools on his route were closed as separatist rebels continue to carry out sporadic attacks. But addressing that rally in Srinagar, he said the suspension of the special status was good for the region, and he accused the opposition of using it to stir up trouble.
The
Congress Party and its allies have misled the people of Jammu and Kashmir, citing Article 370. They misled the country. Today, there is no Article 370. Hence, the talent of the youth of Jammu and Kashmir is being fully respected. There are equal rights and equal opportunities for all.
And Natasha, this is a place that you know extremely well and have written about. What do you make of that visit and the point that he was trying to put across?
I'm a Kashmiri by origin, have worked on Kashmir a long time. I gave testimony at the US Congress as an expert witness when the Article 370 of the Constitution and the autonomy of the region was revoked. So I think it's important to point out, firstly, that this is a politics of spectacle with a commandeered audience. Government employees, according to media reports, were forced to go there. Otherwise, they would be punished. Private school buses were commandeered, again, for the purpose of getting them there at dawn. We're in an environment where this kind of politics of spectacle proceeds alongside the fact that elections have not been held in the region for the best part of a decade, so there haven't been any representative governments. There have been changes since the revocation, also changes to land laws, dissolution of bodies like the State Human Rights Commission. It's now a union territory, so directly ruled from the center. Various kinds of auctions, including a big deposit of lithium that was found there last time. So in my work, I've called this econo-nationalism, the resort to a rhetoric of development without either consultation or consent of the majority or even most of the population, at the same time as promoting this as being something that is development, but actually for certain kinds of commercial interests only, accompanied by also the decline in freedom, civil liberties. Various journalists, including a high-profile case of one who are held in prison for years without any charges being brought in or a trial, and then released and rearrested the next day. So all of this is very dismal in this region, which has seen continued insecurity and is a militarized interstate dispute, and steps need to happen that are more than just speeches ahead of elections and the occasional visit and the theatre. There has to be a genuine...
his point about economic growth?
The economic growth, for it to, as I said, for it to mean something, it would have to be a growth that involves people. We can also, as critical political economy tells us, have economic growth, which results in increased pollution, increased inequality, and no benefits whatsoever, because it's a very poor metric to judge any development by just economic growth. And in this case, it's debatable whether these kinds of large infrastructure projects and other kinds of, as I said, changes to land laws and other domicile laws, etc., are actually helping the population in that region.
I want to give us time to talk about why we remember. Sure.
Well, Proust is my favorite author. I've actually read 3 of the 6 volumes of In Search of Lost Time. I loved Inside Out, the movie where Riley is this character, this animation movie, and things compete in her head for memory. So I think memory is a fascinating topic. I think given the content of our previous discussions, to let you know, I think it's also interesting how currently, much of the politics that we see is actually a politics of historical memory, not the memory of individuals, but a collective reshaping of memory and how we remember those histories and which bits should we forget and who's doing the editing and how we're going to kind of convey this forward. And so much of that is actually about this collective memory. So I think the point is to, I guess, reinforce the good bits. And that's the hard thing to do. From what you're telling me, there's this sense that memory is not so much a photograph, but a kaleidoscope, right? It's like lots of things. I don't know, Julian, if I'm allowed to ask a question about memory, but I want to ask that I'm a time-space synesthetic. I have time-space synesthesia, right? So I see numbers in space and days of the week and years. Does that actually contribute to? I also have a decent memory. Are those things correlated? As a neuroscientist, you might tell me.
Well, there's so much
conversations today. Natasha, thank you very much.